Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, and also the Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. I'm the host and will be the panel moderator today. This event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we serve Utah and its residents by, first, producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. Second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And third, convening trainings and events like this that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. So first, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the John M. Huntsman School of Business and the Utah Education Network, for making this event possible. And now I would like to introduce or mention Karen Turley and Kelsey Emery. They're graduate research assistants for the Utah Women in Leadership Project and for me, and they will be introducing our panelists today. Karen, will you begin?
Awesome, thank you, Susan. What a fantastic panel we have this afternoon. I'd like to welcome our first panelist, Sui Lang Panoke. Sui Lang is the founder of Rethink International, a global social enterprise and international training organization designed to challenge people to rethink how and what they think. She has trained thousands of leaders around the world on a wide range of leadership topics, including personal empowerment, diversity and inclusion, and civil discourse. She currently serves on the executive board of the Multicultural Media Correspondents Association, the advisory board of UWCA Utah's Real Women Run, and is an ambassador of the Utah Women in Leadership Project. She holds an MPA from American University with a certificate in Women Policy and Political Leadership from the Women in Politics Institute, and a bachelor's in political science from the University of Utah. Thank you for joining us today.
Kelsey.
Our second panelist, hi. Our second panelist is Michelle Loveday. She has been an educator for 18 years. She received her bachelor's in education and master's in reading from Bowling Green State University and a master's in education, leadership, and policy from the University of Utah. In March 2020, she began as a consultant for the Jordan School District in Educational Language Services Teaching and Learning Department. As she began to see the needs of Black students in Utah, she created an online virtual academy called RISE. She is passionate about schools being student-focused, equitable, and a place where all students feel that they are welcomed and have an adult that they can believe in who believes in them. She is a proud mother to 5 children and wife to a supportive husband.
Thank you.
Awesome. So our third panelist is Dr. Christy Glass. Dr. Glass is a professor of sociology and the interim director of the Center of Intersectional Gender Studies and Research at Utah State University. She joined USU after completing her PhD in sociology at Yale University. Her teaching and research focus on gender and racial inequalities in the work organizations. Her current research analyzes the factors that shape the careers of women and minority professionals, including CEOs, senior executives, and board directors. Her work has appeared in top journals in sociology and management and has also been featured in multiple outlets, some of which include the New York Times, NPR, and Harvard Business Review. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Glass.
All right, and last but not least, we have LaShawn Williams. She is a licensed clinical social worker with a doctorate in education and faculty member at Utah Valley University. She owns Relational Spaces in Orem, Utah, where she provides mental health therapy, personal coaching, and professional consultations for connecting across difference. She's a co-founder of the Black Clinicians, which is a community training and referral resource of medical and mental health professionals. We're super excited to hear from everyone today.
Thank you so much. I'll be moderating the panel discussion today and have many questions that I'll ask, but we'll actually work in the questions that you can put on the chat through the discussion today. So submit your questions anytime in the Q&A or chat, and the panelists and I will be watching and answering as we can. So, and just a little tip, make sure you post to all attendees because there's might be some good chats happening instead of just the panelists, so other folks can actually learn from the comments as well. So my first question to all of you is, why is each of you so passionate about this topic? So I would love to have, LaShawn, would you start us out and talk about that? And then we'll move through everyone. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. I'm passionate about the life that I live, and I live at the intersection of race, and I live at the intersection of gender, and being able to articulate why these sorts of intersectional lives matter, how they show up, how each of us have intersections where our lives matter and where our progress matters and where our growth matters. It makes me, an easy advocate, an easy champion for these conversations. But I think the more we can start talking about how connected we are to each other, the more we understand how responsible we are for each other.
Thank you so much. Michelle.
So for one, I'm a Black woman. So the intersectionality of my life is daily as I live that. And so it's important that I understand who I am first before I can do anything. And then two, I'm an educator. So I'm always wanting to teach and educate around topics such as this and how to make sure that our students and families have a safe place.
Excellent. Christy.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, and Sui Lang as well for organizing this and for including me. I'm really honored and humbled to be included in this conversation. I'm mindful of my position as a white woman in a conversation about race. I strive and continue to work to be an ally, and for me that means amplifying and supporting the voices of Black women and other women of color, including those on the panel. And also, I come to this topic with a sense of urgency because of my work. I'm lucky to have spent many years listening to the stories and the lives and the experiences of Black women and other women of color in work organizations. And those stories have taught me that really no discussion of women's lives, no discussion of gender equality can be meaningful without engaging with issues of race and racial oppression. And similarly, the stories of the women that I've engaged with in my research suggest that no meaningful discussion of solutions or no movement for gender justice and equity can be sustained without engagement with questions of systemic racism. So I'm really honored to be part of this conversation, and that's just a little bit of how I come into this space.
Thank you. Sui Lang.
Okay, I just want to start off by saying, oh my gosh, I love each one of you so much serving on this panel, and I cannot imagine a better group of women coming together to have this conversation. So again, it is an honor to be here, and thank you everyone so far for your thoughtful and meaningful responses. I was in a conversation the other day with a colleague, and they had asked me, so what had compelled you to pursue the work of diversity and inclusion? And immediately I had a whole host of thoughts and emotions going through my head and my heart, my entire body, because and this was a white male asking the question, because for so many of us women of color, we don't have a choice. Like, this is our lives. As Michelle mentioned, it is a daily lived experience. So it's not that, oh, I chose to pursue this type of work. It's my livelihood depends on it. And so we that compels us to learn, to understand, to study, to pursue education, kind of understanding the power structures and the institutionalized racism and sexism that exists in the environments that we're operating in, so that we can do our best to succeed. So yes, I'm very passionate about this because it's my life.
I love that. Thank you so much. So my next question, and by the way, for all four of you panelists, if we were live, we would just be hopping back and forth and interrupting. Let's still try and do that. It's a little bit harder on Zoom. Like if you have a thought and you know, just hop in or kind of let me see your hand so I can call your name. You know, Zoom is a little more awkward, but let's just jump in. But we really wanted to set the stage, and I'm not sure who would like to, or maybe a couple of you would like to take this question on how racism has really evolved over the past 400 years. Michelle, thank you.
So when you posted this question and sent it to us previously, I sat there for a minute and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to answer that. And I think the better question is, how has prejudice, power, and diversity evolved? Because racism has been racism. It's just been there forever in existence. It's just the way that they've used their prejudice, their power, and their diversity in it. And so when you talk about what is being looked at, you look at how it's taken us 500 years to create the situations that we're in and the work that we have to do to get out of them. And that's what we look at when we have to get rid of the systemic racism that we have in place, right? Because it goes through the power, prejudice, and diversity aspect. And so we do a reach training a lot of and around the districts in the state, which stands for respecting ethnic and cultural heritage. And so if you look at the preamble, one of the questions states, and you look at the 3 major characteristics or criteria for enfranchisement or disenfranchisement, you look at the fact that it's the white male landowner that had the power when they established that, which then goes into everything we're talking about, which is racism, sexism, and elitism. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, we have to ask ourselves, how have we reached the ideals of what's in the preamble? And depending on the day, I'll be like, oh, we are at a 7. Right now, I'm like, we really need some work, we're at a 2. Maybe 8 years ago, I might have been like, we're at a 10, and we finally, but it ebbs and flows, and we look at what's happening in that. So it's not that it's evolved, it's just changed its ugly head. And that's because it's who the power, prejudice, and diversity is surrounding around. And we have to work to change those 3 criterias and characteristics that have been in place to set our system moving forward.
That's a great context for this. Any of the rest of you want to make comments about this? LaShawn, thank you.
I love what Michelle said, because it's really about the foundation of our country. In social work, we talk a lot about systems and homeostasis. And when I talk with our students about assessment, you've got to understand the entire system that is at play. And if it's a chaotic system, understand that the primary goal of every single system is to create balance. So even chaos, if that's the standard issue of the day, that chaos is balance. Xander talks about this in her book, Jim Crow. She says slavery never ended, it evolved. And so in the foundation of our country and the foundation of our beginnings as a country is based on genocide and enslavement, understand that that is the system, and the system's goal is to maintain balance. So whatever it can do, no matter how many years and how many generations pass, every single goal of the system in every generation is to maintain balance. And if the balance is faulty, corrupt, rotten, so far as property, when that's the foundation and that's the chaotic system, then that's the balance that the system seeks to maintain, and it's going to continue doing that. So we have to understand, how do we interrupt the system and really change it? It's not an evolution, it's a maintenance. And that's really what I think we're dealing with, is saying we need to stop maintaining the system and create something that's actually balanced and equal and equitable for as many people as possible at the same time.
And I think your comment is so important. And I'm not an expert on race, I'm an expert on gender, so I'm new to the race conversation. But one of the things, and LaShawn, tell me if you agree, but one of the things that the research says for gender is that if you stop working at some point on sexism, and people say, well, we've arrived, we're close enough, what the research says, it will slip immediately, because the status quo is not, having gender equal. So I would think that it would be similar with race, or even more amplified.
Well, one thing I'll add to that is when you look at the definition of any of the isms, racism, sexism, capitalism, ethnocentrism, etc., Beverly Daniel Tatum in her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together at the Cafeteria Table and Other Conversations About Race, she quotes a 1970s definition which says, racism is a system of advantage based on race. So if you think of every single ism as a system of advantage based on whatever comes before it, then sexism is a system of advantage based on sex. Capitalism is a system of advantage based on capital. So you've got to actually engage the system for change because it's based on sex, race, capital, ethnicity, etc. And so we advantaging our sexual orientation groups in this way, how do we make that equal to actually change the system? If you leave it alone, it will go back to whatever its homeostasis is, and our balance is inequality, unfortunately.
Thank you. Christy.
Yeah, I love the points that have been made, and I just want to add to that from a social science perspective. You know, we see, you know, these yawning racial gaps, whether it's in housing and residential segregation and wealth accumulation and physical and mental health outcomes, and certainly in work and employment. But those yawning disparities sit alongside the stories that I think a lot of white Americans like to tell. You know, research finds that white Americans overwhelmingly underestimate racial gaps and racial disparities. In fact, most of us hold a pretty rosy picture and rosy ideal of our history, and the sense that progress has been linear and constant, right? That some of the worst forms of racial oppression are in the past. We like, you know, this is the story you hear, that extreme forms of racism or racial oppression are ancient history, not really part of our current reality. Yet we also see massive increases in white supremacist recruitment. Significant, that the US State Department has named white supremacist terrorism one of the most pernicious forms and growing forms of violence and terrorism in the United States. And in some ways, I think we're seeing kind of white, you know, extreme forms of white supremacism going mainstream. You know, we have somebody in the White House, Stephen Miller, the Southern Poverty Law Center, released over 900 of his, this is an advisor to the president, released over 900 of his emails, and those emails repeat, you know, they were kind of out of the white supremacy Nazi handbook, you know, fears about white genocide, fears about eugenics, arguments about racial inferiority. So I think it's really important to remember in this conversation that these things are happening on our watch. It's not ancient history. This is our current reality. And if we keep imagining that these things only happened in some, you know, part of our history, we can't really grapple with the reality of what we're dealing with today.
Thank you. And I'll have Sui Lang talk, and then we'll move into the question about how does it play out, you know, consciously and unconsciously. I think that's really important to get to that question next. But Sui Lang, anything else?
Yeah, so wholeheartedly agree with everything that has been shared so far. Two resources come to mind. The first one is a book by Ibram X. Kendi called Remix, Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. It just came out earlier this year. I read that book in literally an afternoon, and it completely transformed my perspective on the race issue in America specifically. And it literally goes back that 400 years, and it's like a condensed history lesson of America through the lens of race. So I highly, highly recommend everyone to read that book. In addition to that, there's also an interview with a leader named Byron Allen. I don't know if any of you know Byron Allen. He is phenomenal leader. Many people, he usually keeps, you know, private. He keeps his life private, but he just purchased the Weather Channel. I mean, he's like a billionaire, Black man. And he did this interview with the Breakfast Club. And he was talking about when he sat down with Coretta Scott King. They had this conversation, And they were talking about how to achieve equality in America. And there were 4 pillars that they mentioned. Number 1 was to end slavery. Number 2 was to end Jim Crow. Number 3 was to achieve civil rights, which we did in the 60s. And number 4 is economic inclusion. And that is the piece that we are still striving for, that all of these isms contribute to preventing certain groups from achieving. And so that really spoke to me in terms of why this intersectionality of race and gender is such an important topic, because for so many Americans, it is still serving as that barrier between economic inclusion.
Thank you so much. And I've seen some chat going on, so I'm assuming someone has put those 2 sources that you mentioned in the chat and for links. Thank you for doing that. And I have to say the resource, and Sui Lang, I'm struggling with getting time to read, but I just finished reading, it's been a month, White Fragility, which has been a profound book for me to read. And I'm still wrestling with how that plays out and what next steps to do. But I'm on my journey. I'm just getting started on that. So I do
transformative. And can I just say that book is helpful for people of color as well too. Not just something for white people to read, but when I read it, completely transformed my perspective as well too. Because obviously we need to learn how to engage with white people too, and so it works on both sides of the aisle with regards to race.
Excellent. And for those people that don't know, that I forget her name, but she's a white woman. Do you remember her name?
Her name is Robin DiAngelo, and
Yes.
the book is written based on her experiences of being a race and diversity trainer for the last 30 years. She's actually published academically a few articles about whiteness and white fragility based on her experiences. And depending on the type of person of color who's reading the book, it actually might not be a great resource because it's very, very triggering to have been in these conversations. And any idea that we would need to learn how to work with white people and to talk to them kind of erases the idea that we have to learn to survive whiteness and white supremacy on a regular basis. So the engagement of trying to survive white supremacist systems is what makes the book kind of difficult to read, because a lot of her book, she spends time quoting Black people and other people of color who are scholars of critical race theory, where if people could just go and read those books, then they would be able to understand. But what it actually demonstrates is that when white people parrot the same sorts of things that Black and brown people have been saying for years as documented scholarship, other white people are able to hear it better from a white person than they do from people of color. So it's really a microcosm kind of experience of what we're really trying to discuss today, is those intersections. And it's made me think too, when we talk about the intersection of race and gender, it often seems to lead to conversations with women of color who are navigating their racial identity and their gender identity as women. And I don't know that we really ever specifically engage white women about their whiteness and their gender, because I feel like that's the only type of intersection that women feel like they have is, oh, I'm a gendered minority, but I'm a racial majority. But there's still a very heavy intersection there to engage for all of us. And I think that work is really where we can start seeing some connections across difference that matter and make change.
Wow. I just had a good aha with your statement, what you just said. I totally, that's been a blind spot. So thank you for that. Michelle, it seemed like you had another follow-up, or should I shift?
Follow-up, but then actually to exactly what Dr. LaShawn said. It's that sense of, it's kind of like saying to a student, oh, well, welcome, an immigrant student, welcome to America. We hope that you can assimilate to our culture, whereas that's the wrong, kind of thought. And so as Dr. LaShawn said, when I read that book, I took it a whole different way. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm always the only Black woman in the room. How do I need to learn to be around others when I'm always around others? And I learned how to navigate it with the, career that I've had. So I think when walking into reading that particular book, we have to ask ourselves, what's the end game of the author. It kind of reminds me, as I sit and watch, the conventions, Democratic and the RNC, it's like they placed people to speak towards the panel. A lot of people that were speaking at the RNC were not speaking to me. They were speaking to people to verify their beliefs.
Excellent.
And so I think that happens a lot with different authors. And so when you're looking for something to talk about the intersectionality of that, Dr. LaShawn hit it, because we do have to talk about how white women are feeling and we, you know, you said something before we went live about how, you know, oh, white is a cult, you know, white is a race. And it's like, yes, everyone has culture. And I think we have Americanized the fact that you are white and therefore that's it. And we've deculturized who you are as you come into this existence as a woman and a white woman, and the power that you do have with that.
Thank you. So I'd like to shift
Susan?
now into.
Sorry, can I just respond?
Well, let me give the next question. Why don't you respond and then move into the next question?
Sure.
So let's.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, whenever I recommend any resource to people, to make sure you're reading it in context, right? Understanding this is an individual's point of view, right? I can't control, or none of us can control how another individual is going to receive something. Obviously, this is a book that triggers a lot of emotional reactions in a lot of people. But I guess I'm not afraid of exposure, right? Being exposed to different points of view. That's how we start to resolve those conscious and unconscious biases. And so I guess that's the point of view that I'm coming from in terms of just being open to learning, right? And not being afraid to, or to stray away from, you know, oh, this is a bad resource, or that would, you know, may not be the best resource for you type of approach. But again, I also recognize the privilege that I sit in. I am not a Black woman. I have not had experiences, racist experiences like Dr. LaShawn and Michelle Loveday have had. And so I'm not, it's not as deep-seated for someone like me as it may be for them. So just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Let's shift over into really discussing ways that racism has in the past, but continues to play out in overt or covert or unconscious versus conscious. And I have to say, I've had people, I teach unconscious bias training. I have had people say, no, you know, I think everything is just unconscious now. It's not really conscious. And I'm like, I don't think so. I still see a lot of both. And so who would like to actually start out on this one? Who has some burning, or should I just call on you? Okay, let's have Sui Lang. Do you want to start this one? You haven't started out one yet.
Okay, so remind me the question again.
So just
heard conscious and unconscious, and where did you want us to go with that?
How discuss ways in which racism has and continues to play out in both ways.
Oh, I mean, I think it obviously absolutely exists unconsciously. And I think it is also more conscious than many of us are willing to admit. Mm-hmm. I've also in the area of doing unconscious bias training right now, and I've learned, just hearing participants, different examples and stories that they've shared, a lot of I'm always surprised to hear how much of it is actually conscious, mm-hmm. right? But when it gets to the conscious level, that's when we need to take responsibility and begin to resolve, right? And the way that works, I mean, my approach is threefold. There's first thought, second thought, third thought. So the first thought is your immediate response, your immediate reaction to something. That's what triggers that thought in your brain, right? And then you have to move through to the second thought, where you apply your personality, moral judgment, you know, all these things that you have learned, your boundaries, standards, all of that to come to a hopefully more thoughtful response. And then the third thought is that final kind of decision-making piece, right? Where as leaders, this is what is most critical in unconscious bias training, so that we don't base our decisions off of snap judgments, right? That's the first thought. And so really taking the time, and it takes time and thoughtful thought, you know, to just stop, slow down, think and process before you move through to that final stage of decision making. And so many of us are juggling so many responsibilities and roles and projects and all of that. We're just like survival mode, you know? And so it really is important to make sure that we are taking the time to go through that process so that our decision making is reasonable, rational, responsible, and thoughtful, right? So that we ourselves are not applying the sexist, the racist, You know, I have those thoughts in my mind. I admit it. We all do. And so it really is just, again, being very thoughtful about that and doing the work to go through the process.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love, I'm going to start doing Dr. Christy. I love using your first name, but putting doctor. I love that. So can you tell us anything that you found in the research on gender and race in terms of conscious, unconscious bias?
Yeah, and you know, for me, I know there's an enormous focus right now on implicit or unconscious bias, and I think I agree with what Sui Lang said, that not only is, I think, overt and explicit racism and sexism actually still very much alive and well, I also think it's hard to necessarily distinguish between those two sometimes in practice. So, for example, two recent studies come to mind. Some of you may have seen the research released last month about discrimination against Black women based on natural hairstyles. And so you know, evaluators were evaluating candidates, and simply based on hairstyle, they evaluated some Black women as less professional and less competent. You know, is that implicit? A little, probably, some of the patterns that Sui Lang was talking about, but it's also, you know, in some ways the definition of white supremacy, which is holding Black women to the standards of professionalism and competence and beauty that we hold white women to, you know, assuming that the white women standard is the standard, and we compare or hold all Black women or women of color against that standard, and of course find them not reaching the mark, right? Another recent study was experimental, and it showed reviewers identical resumes. This is one of a dozen, you know, dozens of resume studies now. Showed reviewers identical resumes, and they only varied the race and the name of the applicant, and these were highly qualified applicants, extremely qualified resumes. And what the researchers found was that Black and Latinx and Asian women faced a double bind. They were evaluated lower than every white candidate, men and women, and they were evaluated lower than all men candidates of any race or ethnicity, right? And the only cue they had was the name. And the differences were systematic and significant. Again, you know, for me, I find it really hard to disentangle what's overt and what's covert there. You know, I hear constantly hiring managers talk about fit, right? Is this person the right fit? To me, that's code for, is this person like me, and is this person someone I'll feel comfortable with? To me, that's pretty overt preference, highly subjective preference for people who look like me, who have similar backgrounds, who may have certain, you know, similar cultural tastes, as opposed to, hey, I want to surround myself with people who think differently. That's where the magic comes. That's where the dynamism comes. So, you know, for me, in the actual lived experience of women of color, in at least in the work context, to me, it's really hard to disentangle overt forms of bias and discrimination from more covert forms. I think they're sisters in this process.
Yeah, and the research I've read actually on FIT totally supports that. And by the way, just one resource for people listening in. If you haven't listened to any podcasts, I do while I'm walking and hiking, on Women at Work. It's a podcast series for Harvard Business Review. They have some really good gender, race podcasts that I've been listening to lately that's given me some good insights. Dr. LaShawn, Michelle.
So in what Dr. Christy had said, Dr. Glass, and in one of the workshops that I had given, I talked about what's in a name, right? And the importance of, one, saying the name properly if you're going to come across names. And another, two, in that resume bias, and as people are looking at the bias of it. And it's one of those things, as we work through our intersectionality, that my mother had said to me years ago, as I was growing up. She said, well, I gave my children resume names. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she said, I wanted to give you names so that when people saw your name on the resume, they wouldn't know. And then I have like a double hidden secret. So when they talk to me on the phone first, I don't sound like whatever that sound should be as a Black woman, right? And that's also another bias of what happens, of what someone should sound like in their name. And so as Dr. Christy points that out, that resume bias is definitely there and alive. And it's one of those things that shouldn't have to be. And then as she speaks to the hair, we have multiple policies that have to come into place. The Crown Act that's been placed in California and other East Coast states that have been put in place, and in Utah it's going to be coming as well, where basically you cannot jeopardize or penalize a student, whether they're wrestling with natural hair or they're walking across the graduation stage with what is natural hair, what's literally growing out of the roots of your head. And so it's important that as we're looking at these systems that I spoke of earlier about, you know, the sexism, elitism, and racism, we have to look to dismantle all of the systems they put in place. So I always say, I don't care how many amendments it's going to take to put things in our Declaration of Independence or Constitution. If we have to put the Crown Act, the Don't Look at Me Wrong Act, the Yes, That's My Name and You're going to hire me regardless, you know, if we have to put all those things in there, we have to ask ourselves, is, you know, we look at everything that Dr. King put down in his dream. It wasn't that flowery, I have a dream that one day my children won't be judged by the content of character. He also said, you know, when will we be satisfied? And the Black person will not be satisfied as long as we do not have mobility of travel, as long as we are not going to be caused to have pay, as long as we're not feeling insecure and safe from our police system. So there was a list of 4 to 5 things that Dr. King said in that beautiful I Have a Dream speech, that we will not be satisfied until these pieces are put together. And that's how we dismantle that system that is in place.
Excellent. Dr. LaShawn.
You know, I can't add anything really to what's been said, aside from the fact that one of the pieces about the semantics, right, of overt versus covert racism, everything's covert until you act on it. Everything is. So the notion, this is what has fueled the research on microaggressions, is that thing that happens when you're like, that didn't feel genuine, right? Because you're learning to read body language. I come from people in the southern parts of the United States where I know if someone likes me or if they don't. I happily would rather deal at times with people in the South because I know immediately. Here, it's so benevolent. The racism out here and the sexism is so benevolent that you have to like think twice about your own lived experience. So when we're saying, you know, well, it's only bad if it's overt, that's where actually we get caught up. It's this notion that, well, I've got to see you bleed in order for me to believe you're in pain. And all that it is victim blaming. You're saying, well, someone that says, hey, this hurts, well, prove it to me that it hurts. How do you know? Are you sure? Did you not miscalculate it? Well, do you think that that's what they really meant? Why am I the person having to prove that what I experienced as painful is good enough for you to agree with me? So with these overt and covert experiences of racism or sexism, microaggressions, it's that thing epigenetically that teaches you, hey, here's one more layer for you to survive every encounter you come across as a woman and a Black person or a person of color. Like, your genetics are there to help evolve with you and to help you survive. And so everything that's allowed your people to survive and to create you in this moment, that's what you're tapping into. And there's a knowing, there's a wisdom, there's a part about having experienced and survived so much oppression and so much discrimination that you know it when you see it. Now, this is the benefit at times and the risk of relationships, is because if I'm willing to invest in a relationship to try and change some of our interactions, what does that work look like? Not just for me, but for the person that I'm in relationship with. And that's a lot of the work that I do, consulting and teaching people how to engage a relationship versus how to invest in a relationship. Invest in something that you want to change. Recognize how consistently you're going to have to engage relationships for the sake of surviving the moment. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is not, am I sexist? Am I racist? It's, how does it play out in my life? It's not, I mean, I teach gender. I have done so much research, but I'm sexist. I see it play, you know, so that's what we teach. Sui Lang and I both do a lot of unconscious bias training. It's not that question. We should be way past that question. It's how does it emerge in my life, whether I'm conscious, whether I'm new, you know, we don't think we're conscious, whether we're totally unconscious. Thank you to all of you for that. I do want to move to the next question, which is really whatever you'd like to share. How has each of you experienced or experienced racism in professional settings or social settings or other kinds of settings? Who would, I'm trying to, I haven't kept track exactly of the order, but Sui Lang, why don't you start? And then Dr. LaShawn, if you would go next, since you were at the end of the last one, that'd be great.
I'll just hop in real quickly. I also wanted to hop on to the end of that last conversation. Wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Christy and Dr. LaShawn's thoughts on covert and overt racism, right? And just the unconscious biases that we all have. In addition to that, what Michelle was talking about with the names, I literally know so many Black people who intentionally choose names for their children that sound white because they know that will be a barrier in terms of their getting their foot into the door with certain corporations, certain companies, certain institutions of higher learning. And that is a perfect example of a racist practice that is still being practiced today. And I think in very covert and overt ways, right? That is serving as a barrier for economic inclusion. And if parents are still making that conscious decision, like something's up, like something needs to be changed. Like that is highly problematic. Yes, Michelle. Continue.
I always joke because I moved here to Utah in 2005 and came across a few names and I thought, oh, they don't know about the rest of the world as they're naming these babies, the names that they're naming. So that's just a joke.
Right, yeah. And see, that's another, like, that was your first thought, right? Like, oh my God, you're really going to name your kid that? Because you understand what they're going to have to deal with in elementary school, high school, college, in the workplace, right? That is really frustrating, right? As people of color with ethnic names. And I have, like, everyone messes up my name, but I have like an Asian name, Hawaiian last name. I don't really receive the discrimination that other clearly Black names would experience. And hey, my name being Asian may even actually go to the top of the pile. You know what I mean? I just don't know. But another quick resource I want to throw out there is Trevor Noah, who hosts The Daily Show. He has a segment that is all about this. And so just Google like Trevor Noah, discrimination in the workplace, names, and he will lay out a whole host of research and personal examples. And it's really entertaining, but informative at the same time.
So before you make a comment on the other thing, my staff our attendees, if you can make sure that you're finding these resources and putting them in the chat. We'll save the chat and in a follow-up email to everybody that's RSVP'd, we'll put those in there so everybody has them. So yeah, to my question though, just to give examples, I'm sure there are a lot of white folks on the call, to give some examples of either overt or covert racism. Dr. LaShawn, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
Because part of the survival experience is I don't really like having to recount that. I don't know that we would ask survivors of sexual assault or sexual abuse to give us examples of when they were assaulted or abused, you know what I mean? And so to have to recount experiences of racism that I've endured and survived, is not necessarily high on my list of things to do. What I wanted to actually come back to was to say, when I moved to Utah, similar, 2005, I thought I had found my people and community because I was seeing LaDonna and I saw a couple of Keishas and I was like, oh my gosh, we've got a big community. And then I would meet LaDon, or I would meet this other name that was a combination of two names, and it wasn't a Black person. And I said, my goodness, do you know what we think? I mean, I thought it was going to be a little different. So it's kind of like the phone call, like, oh, I didn't know you were Black when I was talking to you. I didn't know you weren't Black because your name was LaDon. So, you know, what are we going to do with that? There are these conversations, but there's a privilege that comes in knowing I can name my child LaDon and I'm not worried about their ability to get a job. That's very different in non-ethnic communities. Like, we're very conscious about what do people greet first when they're engaging us. My name is LaShawn. People will see that. And in Utah, I'm like, well, I might have a better chance at this point because my name looks like somebody, I got a capital letter in the middle. This is going to be wonderful, right? But you're talking about this adjustment and this discussion that we're trying to have about, and this is it. It's like, what are the rules? Have the rules changed? If I go by the rules, is it going to work this time? Because we don't have a history of being able to benefit from following the rules. It was, okay, we're enslaved. All right, what are the rules? Okay, I can escape slavery, and then what? Okay, we ended slavery. Okay, well, what are the rules? Okay, 40 acres and a mule, just kidding, we're not gonna do it. Okay, well, what are the rules? And that is the question. What are the rules? The goalposts keep moving because the system wants to maintain balance. Doesn't matter how many times I learn the rules, adjust to the rules, catch up to the rules, get ahead of the rules will keep changing, and I'm not the person changing the rules. I'm the person surviving the changes. And that's the hardest part, I think, about these conversations around connection and intersectionality is I'm not the rule maker, which is why we believe, hey, get in the system and change it from the inside out. But I'm still trying to work within a system that wants to maintain balance. I've got to get folks invested in changing the balance and in making one rule, freedom and justice for all. Okay, what's that look like in all of these different communities? How do we actually effectively and authentically apply that? One set of rules, everybody can do it. That's meritocracy. But we don't have that. We have these conversations about all these different rules. So then let's say I straighten my hair. Oh, well, then it's the earrings you wore. The earrings were too big. When do the rules stop changing? And how do we get people who are not people of color or not Black women to say, hey, listen, this needs to work? Like, when do we actually create the leveraging relationships where someone who can get in without as many questions opens the door behind them and lets us walk in first and then has our back when we're speaking up and can vouch for us? Because it's one less thing for maybe white women to have to deal with, is being seen as less than because of their skin color or their racial identity. But what is the comfort level and the challenge for you all to say, hey, here's how I'm going to bring my sister with me in collaboration and not competition. Here's when one of us gets overspoken by a male colleague, I'm gonna say, hey, you know what? My sister just said that. She just brought that up. It was a great idea. Thanks for repeating it. Can you tell us more about what it was you were thinking? How do we look out for each other? Honestly becomes the question that I really sit with and want us to wrestle with in these sorts of conversations.
I would love that. And I appreciate that pushback a little bit, but also your comments are just have gotten me thinking a lot. Thank you for those. Yeah, where do we want to go in the conversation? Michelle, I'm good to go where we want to go.
So with that, with what Dr. LaShawn is saying and all of that, it's one of those things when everything started happening, we're in 3 pandemics. And when everything started happening between our health crisis of COVID-19, and then in Utah, we have weather that's happening with hurricanes and before that, earthquakes. And then as everything started to come to a head with the murder of George Floyd, I sat back and I thought, what in the world is going on? 1, we have lost our complete humanity. 2, where is the outcry of my white feminist sisters that have created blogs and posts and Facebook? And I had already asked that question prior when white feminists were rising up and wearing their pink hats. I thought, they're not speaking all for me. They're not really there. And I was thinking about the research of Kimberly Crenshaw. She had done some social theorist work back in the early 90s. And she talked about how the theory of Black feminists and and speaking out against white feminists because their movement was not for us. And so we look at all of those different mainstream feminist movements, it's only for a certain journey. And so when George Floyd called out for his mom, you know, and you have the wall of moms that have been created, they were like, he was calling out for me, the white wall of moms. But then you look at the movement of what that white wall of moms have been, right? They're not coming to the other side. They're only staying over here. And yes, they're protecting and they're keeping the fight from happening, but they're not stepping over to hold the hands next. So I think to be a feminist, a true feminist, it's not about color. And I think Black feminists have a struggle with trying to unite with the white feminist movement because it's so hard. And so to answer your question, yes, we've experienced racism. That's just to be without default. So as I was trying to grapple with the death of George Floyd and trying to grapple with what is to continue as a daughter of a sharecropper and, you know, a great, great, great granddaughter of a runaway slave, it hit me. This is not going anywhere. What can I do? What do I need to do? And that's where, you know, as you saw, that's where I was like, I'm going to create a community for Black students to learn about their history. And so as we asked that question of, how have you experienced racism? I was like, I'm going mute. If any of my neighbors come and want to ask me how I'm feeling, if any of my friends text me, former, you know, people that I had worked with and been the principal over their school, they'd send me a text message. What can I do? I'm like, you can Google it, because there's so many things out there to Google at this point. You have no excuse not to. You have no excuse to not type in what is, and Google will finish your question for you. What is B? What is bias? What is, you know, blaming the Black man? Whatever you want to Google, it's going to be there, and you'll have experiences on experiences of people who you can purchase their material from and give back to the Black community. We talk about so many different things of racism and sexism, but it's around and around because you want us to recount the experiences, but then there's no payment for those experiences. And so by Googling it, there's so many things that you can take as a white feminist, a white woman, a white man, the 21-day challenge that even our YWCA just did recently locally. There's so many ways that you can explore that so that you can open yourself up. And Dr. LaShawn said it beautifully, of engaging in relationships. And as an educator, that's what I say to all of my teachers. You cannot and you will not teach these students if you don't have a relationship with them. That's the front porch of anything that's going to happen. And so as we continue to have these cultural conversations, it's important to look at your front porch. Does it need to be cleaned off? Do you have a rocking chair? Do you have lemonade? Is it warm? Is it welcoming and inviting to have those conversations, those authentic conversations to learn and engage? And as you learn and open up, you'll realize, you know, for people to sit back and say, oh, I don't think that there's systemic racism, you should Google it. Like, you literally can Google so many instances of where people are getting denied home loans because they're Black, where, you know, just even recently in our last 5 years, Wells Fargo had to revamp everything that they did because of how they acted. And so as we look at the intersectionality of race and gender and all the women that are on here, they have to ask themselves, what have I done for my Black sister in handing out that assistance? What have I done in the fight? Have I stayed quiet about, you know, the police brutality, but then I opened up about the sex trafficking that's happening? And if you're going to open up about the sex trafficking, wonderful. Let's not omit our Latinx families that are being separated and those children that are being sex trafficked. You can't pick which sex trafficking you want to highlight. You don't get to choose. And so I implore everyone to look at it holistically and get out of that comfort zone. And definitely, I mean, Google it. Like, there's so many instances. Like, just type in my name and there's some newspaper articles you can read about it, because I'm too tired to say it again. I'm just
that's so perfect. And you know, there's so many, I think what each of us do, you all and me and other white women and men, is individual. I mean, we're comfortable with certain things, but we need to get out of our comfort zone. But maybe I can use my voice differently than someone else could use her voice. So the solutions, or if they're not solutions, what are they? The next steps, right, may look different for me than Christy. And we all have to wrestle. And I'm talking more and more about deep work. And this is deep work, isn't it? It's not shallow work.
And we all have bias. We all have our own bias. I had to come across my own bias in July as I'm grappling with all the things that are going on.
Great, thank you. Dr. Christy and Sui Lang, any comment? Well, we have lots of comments. I love this. Thank you.
Yeah, just really to echo Michelle's critique of white feminism. You know, we're seeing, I think, the most important Black civil rights movement in our lifetimes right now, and that comes on the heels of the Me Too movement, which I think followed a really similar pattern to what Michelle is talking about, which is it was founded in 2006 by a Black woman, Tarana Burke, who actually started the movement out of the work she was doing with young Black survivors of sexual violence. And she wanted to create community and support for young Black women. But I think, you know, most of us didn't become familiar to this movement until white Hollywood actresses, elite, wealthy, celebrity white women started calling attention to the abuses of a elite, powerful white man, Harvey Weinstein. And we saw this yet again, this well-worn pattern where Black women lead and innovate and challenge us, and that becomes co-opted by white feminists. So most of us know a lot about Harvey Weinstein and the white women who were victimized by him, and yet we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of the stories of Black and Indigenous women and girls, including Black trans women, who've been victimized by violence and harassment at the intersection of race and gender. So I just wanted to say that we're witnessing exactly what Michelle is talking about right now in a movement that is supposed to be a foundational movement for women. And I feel like this movement had enormous potential that we will never actually see because it continues to silence the voices, the stories, the lives of women outside of that elite white norm.
Thank you so much. I want, Sui Lang, just give me a second while I set the stage. I'm looking at time and I have a whole list of questions. We're not going to stick to the whole list. Let's just put it out there. So what I want is Sui Lang to share her thoughts, and I would love if the other three of you would look over in the chat. And I do want to save about 10 minutes at the end for how to move forward. You're already giving us some ideas on that, but I would like to just leave it, like some next steps to move forward. So if you three can check out what intrigues you with the conversation going on and some of the questions that are there, and then just let's bring them in. So Sui Lang, any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. First of all, Christy, thank you so much for your scholarship, your knowledge of the research and the history of all of this, and for so eloquently bringing up all of those important points. Michelle, I'm cracking up about your Google it line. Like literally, there's no excuse. You can Google it. So it's today's form of education, right? And then in response to Dr. LaShawn, you had mentioned, and this will also speak to Susan's, moving towards where do we go from here, right? Your point about rules and rule making, I absolutely do believe women of color, people of color have the power to make the rules. And I'm already starting to see that change happening. And I firmly believe that is why projects like the Utah Women in Leadership Project are so important. Why projects like YWCA's Real Women Run is so important, because we recruit train, and support women and women of color to pursue positions of power, and positions of power in the political arena specifically, which has been my passion for the past 2 decades. And living in Washington, the overwhelming majority of my professional career has been in Washington, D.C., where it is very multicultural, multidimensional, perspective, ideology, everything across the board. And I have sat in power circles with all women of color, all people of color, and we have made the rules. And I have seen the impact of those decisions, and it felt great. So the reason why I'm so passionate about this work is because I've gotten a taste of the good stuff, you know what I mean? And I know it's achievable, which makes it more believable for me. Coming back to Utah, it's different. It's a different environment and culture, which again, why these women's groups and conversations are so important. It's almost like starting at ground zero again for so many folks. But again, I firmly believe we are making progress and moving in the right direction.
So I'm
gonna take a look at the chat now.
Yeah, take a look at the chat. But sometimes when people talk about gender specifically, to me, and that's where most of my experience is, you know, I said the needle is moving, but it's maybe just this much. So we have a lot more to do. But I think, Sui Lang, your point is well taken in that we see some bright spots, you know, here and there, a few things moving forward. So what have the other ones of you seen that seems really interesting that you would like to respond to and talk about? Oh, putting you on the spot here.
I know, as we're reading, I'm like, let me scroll back and see.
There was a question in the chat about intersectionality for women, and how do we as presumed cisgender women think about the inclusion of trans women in these movements for women. And I think it's an excellent question, and it's a really good opportunity to like demonstrate what the wrestle with privilege looks like and what the commitment to change can look like. And I think for me as a cisgender woman, it's an exciting time, because that's the thing that gets you excited, right? About being an ally, like, oh my gosh, I can make change. This is something, I can do it. I'm here, I got it. Yes, all right, I am an ally. I have the privilege, let me go and leverage it for change. But then we have actually no idea about what the experiences are for my trans sisters. I've toyed with the idea of trying to change my language, and every single time either acknowledging that I'm cisgender when I'm talking about transgender sisters, or just saying I'm talking about women, inclusive of cis and trans sisters. And as I continue to kind of build my language and my vocabulary, I'm hopeful that it helps. It's not my decision to decide if and how I'm being an ally. I was thinking about Sui Lang's comment earlier about the 3 types of thoughts that we have. And I think a lot of our work around our effective, appropriate, and authentic inclusion of women in these conversations of feminism is to say, okay, what does it mean that I have to do as a cisgender woman to ensure that I'm inclusive in my language, inclusive in changing my beliefs, not inclusive in having, I've got to change this. I've been socialized to be transphobic, and I have got to understand that, acknowledge it, and I have to dismantle that. I have to deconstruct it, and I can't deconstruct it if I don't name it. So I thought about what's my first thought, my second thought, and my third thought. So within the therapeutic line, we talk about cognitive behavioral theory, which is what you think, what you feel, and what you do. So what are my thoughts when it comes to interacting with and advocating on behalf of my transgender sisters? What are my feelings about it? And what work am I doing to actually mitigate those feelings and make sure that they're not going to be causing harm? And then what am I doing? And some of the work that I can share that I have been doing is understanding how much of our constructed engagements with women is our constructed engagements with attraction, and how attraction is what makes a woman. And so the first thing that I have to do is understand a woman is not a woman based on if you're attracted to that woman, because this is the same kind of damaging mentality that causes rape with men. And you'll see with a sister, like when Tarana talked about the Me Too movement, how she had to explain that people are saying, oh, well, you look this kind of a way. Are you sure anyone actually abused you? Because they think you have to be attractive in order to be abused. And we've really got to deconstruct these notions around attraction as the prerequisite for abuse, but it's around attraction as the prerequisite for acceptance. we're going to try and see people as people, but I cannot erase the fact that we may have some differences. So for me, in that position of privilege, I'm wrestling with how I've been constructed to see other women, and whether I see them in cooperation or whether I see them in competition. That's inclusive of me with my trans sisters, but my trans sisters get to lead the charge. I get to do my personal work and let my actions speak for myself, because a lot of times we can be traumatizing to folks to have them hear us doing our work. Like, it's traumatizing. Nobody wants to hear all that. Go to your therapist and work through your racism and work through your bias. I don't want to hear that, because that's you learning at the expense of me being here in the moment. So as a cisgender person, like, I briefly shared some of the work that I'm doing, but like, that's not the place for the forum, because I don't want it to come off like I'm trying to prove myself as a good cisgender person. I do want to say that I'm aware of it and I acknowledge it. And I do want to say that I know I've got some work to do, and I'm trying to make sure I stay on top of that. So like, it's not rare. I mean, it's rare that I have a ton of privileges, but that's one of them. And I wanted to speak to the question in the chat that asked about how do we see our inclusion happening? It's a layer of inclusion. And I think it's one of the ones we probably might struggle with the most, because there are a lot of things we've been socialized to see that get in the way of our ability to connect as women across and inclusive of our gender identities.
I love that. I think too, as we're looking at that. Oh,
I just wanted to quickly say I've decided during Dr. LaShawn's comment that we need to put another toolkit on my website.
Yes, of resources.
So yeah, let's collect. I'll bug you all after, but seriously, let's have some resources. And so Michelle, please.
So, and when Dr. LaShawn was talking about that, it's the very thing, as we talk about teachers, it's important. It is our students and our children, our youth. It is literally their life that we're talking about when we talk about this. And so as we talk about the intersectionality on race and gender, you look at the intersectionality of race, gender, and our trans sisters. That is such a multifaceted layer. And so as observers, as people trying to establish relationships, you have to say to yourself, being around and exposing myself too is not going to change who I am. And we have to, like Dr. LaShawn said, we have to get that socialism that we've got into us. It's such a layer. One, we have to recognize difference. And when you go, I encourage you, if you don't feel comfortable going to rallies or protests, look through pictures of what signs you see from people and what they're holding and how they identify with. If you were to ask me, do you see yourself in your race or your sex? It's so multi-layered. I'm a Black woman. Like I can't have one without the other. And so if you look at signs, you see a whole movement of people that came together, during their Pride Month, we were having our civil outcry and they didn't have an attitude about it. They just came with signs that says, I'm a Black trans female and I want this. And so having that rallying cry and seeing that support opens eyes to making sure that we recognize difference. And then of course we need to avoid oversimplified language. So avoid oversimplified language. So a lot of the outcry from the Women's Marches, I was looking at it not only from Black feminists, but also from our trans feminists, when they put the vagina-centric themes to the march, that was very off-putting to our trans sisters. It's kind of like, well, just because I don't have a vagina, am I not a woman? And why is your vagina your sense of power? And why are we putting power behind that illuminated thing? And then we have a song that's come out about it. So we have to look at that. I had to say that. But then we also have to say, we have to look at other points of view, right? We are so narrowized into our focal point. And I think as educators, Sui Lang and Dr. Christy and Dr. LaShawn, we definitely, and Dr. Madsen as well, we live in the realm of learning, constantly seeking points of view, but we have to look at everything from perspective and not just your perspective. And that doesn't mean that when you look at it from other points of view, it's going to change your point of view. Maybe it will, maybe it'll enlighten it, but it'll also give you a way to understand and move forward, as Dr. LaShawn said, to your actions, right? Yeah. It's that head, that heart, that hands, the healing that will come to play as we work to make this change.
And I I've seen a few chats. I'm trying to concentrate, so I'm multitasking, but there's been some
Unmute themselves and just
we
ask.
we haven't, we haven't talked about, we've talked about sexism and racism, but not necessarily women with disabilities, or, the disabilities and LGBT and some of the other things as well that all add those layers of intersectionality, right? So I would love to shift to some other questions. Dr. Christy, Sui Lang, are there other questions that I'm being mindful of time and want to get a few other questions in. What seems interesting? Dr. Christy.
Just to really build on what's been said about next steps, a recent poll found that white Americans are the least engaged in any action, from joining a movement all the way to reading a book. White Americans are overwhelmingly the least engaged in the current reckoning around race and racial oppression. And this poll was not surprising, but deeply troubling. And I just, it seems so obvious, but I want to actually say it, that it's not the job of Black women to fix racism. I think, including myself, white women and white men must begin to interrogate whiteness, our own individual kind of sense of racial entitlement, but also the institutions and organizations to which we belong to, and the ways in which those organizations celebrate and privilege whiteness. We have to begin doing that work, and we're not doing the work. Ibram Kendi, Sui Lang mentioned Ibram Kendi earlier. He said recently that we're at a moment in our country's history that has two warring impulses. One is that there's a spotlight right now shining on the unconscionable ways in which racism and white supremacy continue to shape our country, our institutions, and the lived experience of Americans. The second impulse is to turn away and deny that reality, because it's really hard and it's really ugly, and it undermines the stories we like to tell about ourselves and our country and our history and our democracy. And so while it's getting harder and harder to deny racial injustice, if this poll is any indication, most white Americans are fearful of what that acknowledgement might look like, and they're not leaning into this moment. And I think part of that is fear. I think white people, including white feminists, are fearful of saying the wrong things, of making a mistake, of putting their foot in it. And I just want to say, like, failing is part of showing up. You will fail. You will make mistakes. I make mistakes constantly, probably multiple times a day. But I think it's important for us to realize that our fear of messing up or saying the wrong thing cannot be compared to the fear of Black women over their lives, over their children's lives, over their brother and husband's lives. So we have to put our fear into perspective. We have to show up. We have to acknowledge our privilege. We have to educate ourselves, as the other speakers have said. We have to ask ourselves really tough questions. Where do we live? What kinds of schools do our kids go to? Who are the dominant voices in our communities and our religious institutions and our work organizations? But we can't stop there. That work that we're doing on Google and elsewhere is preparing us so that we can play a supportive role in the movements and efforts of women of color, right? I think the other thing that white feminists have to get comfortable with is playing a supportive role. Not being the lead, not being in charge, not having the microphone. From my perspective, I see young men and women of color in the streets around the country, including in Utah. And I think they're telling us, they're shouting at us that they deserve better. I think they need to know we hear them, we see them, and we're willing to make the sacrifices and do the work that they deserve so that we can show up in a way that can actually produce some type of sustainable change.
To move things forward. And Sui Lang, I didn't mean to leave you to last again, but it's your time. Sorry.
No worries. Wow. I wholeheartedly just loved everything that everyone had shared. Dr. Christy, thank you so much for that lead in. I'm just going to speak a little bit to what you shared. Another quote that I love by Ibram X. Kendi is, "The heartbeat of racism is denial." And it comes in the form of, "I'm not racist." And so many people have that thought cross their mind. They say it verbally and they believe it, right? I think another part of why we're seeing this apathy that you described, right, from the poll, is that people are just lazy. I mean, it's apathy, right? It's not necessarily just fear of confronting this reality that, yes, racism, sexism is alive and well in America today, but they don't want to do the work, right? The work that women and women of color have been doing our entire lives. For the mere fact of, we have to do it. We can't not do the work, in order to move our lives forward. And so it's very important to just, find the energy to do the work. I saw another question on there about allyship and white saviorism. And so that is one way that white women in particular can be allies, right? Is to make time and energy to do the work, right? That's what we need, and take the conversation beyond a conversation, right? And it comes in the form of, and this is how I also structure my unconscious bias trainings, right? All of our conscious and unconscious biases are rooted in our personal experiences, and they influence our perceptions, conversations, interactions, and ultimately our decision-making in that order. And so it's very important for us to really step outside of ourselves, right? And kind of analyze our own personal experiences and how have they shaped what we see in the world, the conversations, and how we're engaging in the conversations that we're engaging in, how they impact how we engage with people, right? And this is what Brian Stevenson speaks about a lot about as well. A lot of his suggestions and recommendations of reforms, it's really about how we engage with people, right? That starts to move the needle and cause that cultural shift that needs to happen in order to move the needle. And then ultimately, again, as leaders, decision-making, the policies, the processes, the practices that we are implementing in institutions of higher learning, in our corporations, nonprofit organizations, in government, right? That really is going to make the difference, and we'll see that shift. And hopefully one day we will achieve true equality, freedom, and justice in this democratic society that, we love, right?
I love that. I was smiling just a minute ago, just at you, but also, like, Michelle, I have to tell you that right before you said, like, Google it, this was from earlier, but I'm still thinking about it. I was going to say, so what can me as a white woman do? And then, like, right after you said Google it, I'm like, okay, I will Google.
Michelle, that's going to be my takeaway from this conversation.
And I don't mean that to disrespect anyone that's here. I don't. I think first and foremost, the fact that everyone is here on this conversation, listening to the recording afterwards, I seriously think that that's the first step. And I think it's the most important step. But in some respects, on some of the general questions, just in general things like, oh, how do you do your hair? Okay, well, you can Google that. There's like 50 million YouTube videos around that. And I don't mean it in any disrespect, but I also mean it in the sense of where Black women are in their exhaustion, right? And where we are. So I'm not trying to.
No, it was fun.
But you know what? If that's all that you've learned today, that's the important part. But I do want to highlight a few things as we were talking about different things.
Michelle,
and thoughts.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Just real quick. I would love to have you do that. But what I'm I'm looking at time. I need like just 1 minute at the end, and we want to close at 1:30, but I would love to have each of you now take, and Michelle, you go ahead and start. Take 2 minutes is what I'm seeing, like 2 minutes to give a final, whatever you would like to say.
Okay, 2 at 2. Who's old enough to know that TV show? 2 on 2? It's a commercial break. Anyway, so for me, as I'm sitting there thinking of everything, 2 things come to mind as I'm talking about intersectionality. And I was going back and forth, and I thought one thing that I'm not sure about just yet, I'm starting to lean towards the fact that I like the term BIPOC more than women of color. And I know that there's some questions on the term BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. But I look at that, and I right now I sit in, I don't want to be categorized in the group of women of color. Not that the women of color are a bad group to be in, but I feel like it's, for lack of a better term, like, you know, Sui Lang said, you're lazily categorizing me. And there's so much more to who I am as a Black woman that when I become the first something, I don't want to have behind my bio the first woman of color. It needs to be the first Black woman, and then everything else, the first Native woman, the first Latinx woman. I think the clumping has made society a little lazy and seeing what cultures are needed and what is needed in each culture to fix some things. And then the second thing that I recommend, if anyone has not been able to watch it, but it got my mom and I talking, and you know, you have 30-year age gap between my mom and I, and we talk about different things all the time, daily. And one of the ones was the Netflix documentary, Mrs. America. And it was such a good documentary because there were things, again, growing up in a Black home, that my mom would say about white feminism and the women's movement and what they were fighting for, and how those housewives were not fighting for her. And so when I watched the documentary, I thought, oh my goodness, are we repeating? Have we not moved forward in any sense? And even though it was a short documentary, I don't know how accurate it was. There's fights back and forth on whether she was displayed correctly. It did make me Google quite a bit to look at where things had moved and the needle that had moved as far as Black feminism, white feminism, and the voice of, well, let's just push this forward and stay quiet for a little bit until we can get it. And then when you get it, you know, I'm a part of an organization, Delta Sigma Theta, that marched with white women in 1913 to get the right to vote, even though they knew they would not get the right to vote. And how many times as Black women do we do that? How many times do we constantly say, okay, I'm going to support you because I know eventually I'll get it? Why don't we flip that script? You know, why don't we rethink, as Sui Lang has in her business, rethink it and fight for Black women? And then my final thought, and I think I've gone a minute over, I'm sorry, sis, is we have to look at the systemic things that are happening with slavery and how you look at families and the structure. And, you know, it's just diving in monetary. I would implore you to look at Slavery by Another Name, 13th, on all those documentaries that talk about the criminal system and how the justice system has put a lot of our men, Black men and boys, incarcerated, and it constantly, no other community really, you know, has been ripped from each other the way that Black families have. And then that leads to final things of just please vote. We have an Amendment C that talks about removing the term slavery in the Utah Constitution. This is Utah where we have the word slavery used. So please vote and remove that. We have a chance as Utahns to end the injustice of slavery in our state for once and for all. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Sui Lang, I don't want you to go last because I made you go last. So can you do your 2 minutes?
Sure, I'm not even keeping track on that, Susan. So no worries there. I just wanted to speak to Michelle Loveday. I love how you you want to be very specifically recognized as a Black woman. Wholeheartedly agree. And for those of you who don't know, I am of Native Hawaiian, Filipino, Chinese, Irish descent. And so I'm a member of the API community. And we are oftentimes all grouped together, Asian Pacific Islanders, right? And there are so many nuances. And what's frustrating when people do that, especially the government, is they fail to recognize there are certain groups within that group that are receiving benefits or privilege or whatever you want to call it, over other groups in there, right? And so there's huge kind of marginalization within that group. And so it's highly, highly problematic to put a whole category of like multi-ethnic, multicultural groups of people into one category. So I really appreciate that about you. That speaks to me as well. And I guess just in closing, I've had so much fun today.
It's been good.
This was an awesome conversation. I have learned so much from the conversation. And I guess my takeaway would just be to encourage everyone to do the work, right? And this work, although it takes a lot of time and energy to do it, it also gives me energy as well too. It like serves like it, I don't know how to describe this, but like I'm so passionate about it. Like it fuels my livelihood in a sense, you know what I mean? And it just drives me to want to do more of it. And so that's my takeaway.
Thank you so much. Dr. Glass, Dr. LaShawn, who wants to pop in next? Dr. Christy, go for it.
I'll be really quick. I feel like there is so much to be discouraged about. People are suffering and hurting right now, right? We are continually confronted with the racial violence in our justice system, not just in terms of police violence, but much deeper and broader than that. We're experiencing the crisis of the pandemic that is having devastating and disparate impacts on Black, Indigenous, and Latinx women and children and communities. We're seeing an environmental crisis, and we know that environmental crises disproportionately affect Black communities. And yet I feel like, I'm excited and encouraged also by the possibility of this moment. I feel like sometimes crises can be opportunities for change. By exposing, by uncovering and exposing the deep inequalities in our society, crises, by exposing the cracks in the facade of the stories we like to tell about who we are and what we're about. I feel like crises can give us a language and an opportunity to try new things, to experiment with new approaches, to listen to new voices. And crises can give us certainly a chance to rethink the stories we tell. But just to reiterate what Sui Lang said, do the work. This is kind of a all hands on deck kind of historical moment. There's no space for neutrality or indifference or silence. Start where you are, learn and grow from that point, and make sure that you're joining solutions where Black women have the microphone, Black women are leading, and helping us navigate a better future that gets us closer to racial and gender justice.
Thank you so much. Dr. LaShawn, some last words.
I'll be quick. What I will say is, look at where you are from the top to the bottom. And when you understand where the bottom is, understand that your progress is measured based on their position. What I mean by that is one of the works that we have to do where race is concerned is engage anti-Black white supremacy. We have to understand that the further away you are from being Black, the better you're going to be treated. So if Black people are treated well, it's going to be good for everyone. A sister in the comments has been mentioning consistently about the move to include the disabled community in these conversations. As someone who is able-bodied, I am judged and I am benefited based on how far away I am from the disabled community. And if I'm not aware of that, I'm trying to survive a system, right? But I have got to understand, okay, I'm fine. Whether I use privilege or not, I'm fine. How do I make sure that I'm leveraging so that the disabled community is getting exactly the rights that they need and what's going to make them be just as comfortable as they deserve to be? Not as comfortable as me. They may need more, right? But am I willing to do that work? So you got to understand, where are you at in the relative treatment of different populations in society. When it comes to race, you're judged based on how close or far away you are from Blackness, and you benefit from that. Even I, as a Black woman, benefit from the fact that I'm a lighter skinned Black woman, and there's no room for me to ignore that that is a truth. So there is layered work for each one of us to do. The second thing I was going to say is pick one way that you can engage. Pick one way that you can invest for change in your workplace or in your personal relationships. Like Michelle used the documentary Mrs. America to connect with her mother and have conversations. Pick something. Pick one thing, not everything, but pick one thing that you want to do to help engage and invest in a relationship. Hey, let's watch 13th and talk about it, because I want to learn more and I want us to be better in our relationship. Let's pick one thing that we can do together. The book Race Talk talks about, it's from Daryl Wing-Soo, who's the scholar behind microaggressions, and he says, it's not how you cover up your mistakes, but how you recover from them that matters. We've got to figure out to how we start recovering. That's what we've got to focus on, is recovery, recovery, recovery. We cannot keep trying to cover it up and not talk about it and think that if we don't talk about it, it will go away. It won't, because the system wants balance. Our job is to interrupt the system, create balance or create some imbalance so that we can actually create harmony. And harmony is not going to be that everything is equal, but that all parts are coming together to create the sound and the story that we really say we matter and that we value most.
Thank you so much to all four of our panelists today. What I've realized is that I have a lot of deep work to do on these topics, and I'm actually really excited to do more. You've motivated me to do more. So thanks to the panelists. Thank you for everyone joining us, and have a wonderful day.